Purpose Highway is a space for discussions that drive connections toward people's highest purpose to build a better self and a better world. Join me for season 1, where I start to uncover stories of entrepreneurs and thinkers that are making an impact. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody. It's Scott Mason here, revving up for another race down the Purpose Highway. And sitting with me in the front seat here today is Erin Hatzikostas. Erin is a self-described professional pot stirrer. How's that for an opening line? She's the founder and CEO of Be Authentic Inc., and she's devoted to making the corporate world more authentic, diverse, balanced. She's a career coach. She is an author, and we're going to talk about that book. She's a podcaster. She's a TEDx speaker. She is the former CEO of a 9-figure corporation. And while she was there, by the way, she tripled its revenue. And she is an unwitting, but very, very gifted comedian. Whether you realize that or not, that needs to be in your bio, Erin. Erin, welcome to the show. It is so good to have you.
Thanks, Scott. I'm so happy to be here. That's hilarious. I always say I'm not really good at making up jokes, and I'm not really a comedian, but I'm really good at being unexpected. And so I think that's where my humor comes from.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's what humor is all about, isn't it? Sort of that surprise moment. Erin, I've just read off an incredible list of accomplishments, but I have to just ask, because after hearing all that, I know the listeners and the viewers are going to be asking, where did this person come from? Like, what kind of family created such awesomeness? Is it possibly true that, for instance, your folks were teachers in the Midwest? How did you emerge? Tell us that story.
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan. Parents were both teachers, and was pretty sheltered from even a highway. We didn't have a highway within an hour of my house. But I was always very curious, and then also a little bit naive. And I loved the thrill of tackling new things, trying to figure things out, and quite frankly, surprising my parents. So even when I first interviewed for my first internship, I went out to Connecticut. I don't think I even told them that's what I was doing. I love this element of surprise. So in my journey, into the corporate world, I'll just start there and then pause, and we can take it wherever you want to do it. Much like I'm sure most of your listeners, didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was good at math. So I went into college knowing, okay, I'm good at something that not a lot of people are good at. Probably should pursue it. I'll do engineering. Very quickly realized I did not like engineering. And so my sophomore year, I was, still trying to figure out what it was. I was still taking math classes, and, you have those moments, right, in life, Scott, that are just so profound, and you don't really realize it until many years later. But this moment was profound. My roommate came home from school. She was a year older, and she was in the business college. And she knew I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And she said, "Oh my God, Erin, I found the career for you. It's high pay, it's low stress, and you just have to be good at math. And you're the only person I know that's good at math. It's called an actuary." And I was like, huh.
Yes.
No, this was back in like 1995, 96, so there was no run to the Google, right? I had no freaking clue what an actuary, but high pay, low stress, like, yeah, why is this not, in my guidance counselor's math? And so I went to the library, and I'll never forget, right? Like, we had to go to the library. I probably had to go to like the 4th floor, and in true actuarial fashion, and we can joke, right? Lawyer, actuary, like, who is more, right?
Frightening, isn't it?
And I finally find something on actuaries, and it's this gray, like 4x6 pamphlet, 0% to it, right? And you open it up. All it does, it doesn't tell me what an actuary does or is. It literally just lists the company's names, their physical address, and their phone numbers for companies that hire actuaries, right? So being the smart cookie that I am, right, I started looking through it, and I saw a trend. I saw all these companies that were in Connecticut. I thought, well, I'm going to figure out where Connecticut is, and I'm going to find my law. And so I always say I kind of swindled Aetna into hiring me into a pretty prestigious internship program. Their actuarial internship program, there's only 10 or 12, and you actually got paid. I thought I was going to go out and have to wait tables at night. I actually got paid like, I don't know, $12 an hour or something, big time like that. And
ain't bad
and I
for
know
that
you're
time
going
and
to
era.
appreciate this story. So I go out, and I mean, I quickly realized that while this seemed like the right fit on paper, like my personality wasn't quite jiving with, the roles. But we had these professional development days every like Friday. They'd have a speaker come in for the interns. But one Friday we did, the Myers-Briggs assessment. And so they take all these actuarial interns into this huge ballroom. It was like one of those, we owned the hotel at the time, and it was like 15 people in like a 300-person ballroom. So totally over-engineered, doing this, what felt like the fanciest test ever, right? I'm a math major. Like, I didn't do personality shit, It's like, what's this fluffy crap? And so we finish, they compile the results as good actuaries do. And I remember walking back into the ballroom, and I know you can relate to this story. And, they were so excited to pull up on this huge screen, like almost movie-sized screen in this oversized ballroom, the results. And they had it in like a matrix. And all I remember is looking up on this huge screen and seeing me all by myself in my own quadrant. And, I tell this story because, I then went on to come back to the company, be in their, what they call their actuarial program, and take the professional exams. It's like the bar on crack. You have to keep taking the bar and versions of the bar, but math, that's graded on the curve. And I took about 7 exams over the next couple of years, and I was a proud recipient of 6 or 7 failures, like straight up failures. It was a pass-fail. But I started to realize that what felt really awkward, that Myers-Briggs that had me in my own quadrant, sort of like, but wait, maybe that's actually the thing that's really going to make me successful.
Yeah. So I've got to ask, what was your type?
I was E. I was definitely an E extrovert. I think it was like ETNJ, not a plan. I remember an extrovert, not a planner. I don't remember the other two.
Okay, so for anyone listening, I've never revealed this on the show before, but I knew you were going to say ENTJ. I am an ENTJ too. Now, I've been told that ENTJs either love each other or hate each other. I guess it's good that we love each other. Otherwise, a world war could have started on this podcast right here with people listening.
I think I was in a group project with my MBA with some of the ENTJs that I hated, right? Like, type A, like we all want to take over and we want to kill each other. That's great.
Absolutely. Now, you ended up a CEO of this massive company. Obviously, you managed to figure out the secret sauce connecting your uniqueness that may have made you an outlier early or on in your career, but took you places most of your colleagues would never have imagined. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I'll talk a little bit like what I was thinking as I went through, and then a lot of what our conversation will be the real aha on the back end, which is this authenticity component, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, on the front end, and as I was going through it, I had this curiosity. I always had this desire to surprise myself and others. Could do things that were nebulous, and I was probably not qualified to do. And with my career, I always looked at the next move strategically, but in different ways. I never looked at 5 years from now I want to be, but each time and I have this rule, I call it the 50% rule. What next role can I take that makes me 50% uncomfortable? 50%, I'll bring some skill set, some knowledge, but 50% of it needs to be totally new. Because I very quickly learned that it was those, other people might call it take stretch assignments. I call it the 50% rule, right? Like find those things that are going to catapult you because you're just exponentially growing. And so all along my career, I was always trying to, for example, my first big girl job, I was leading strategy and business development for our international arm. So I was like over in the UK, like meeting with all the Simons of the Department of Health and building a business. I did an acquisition. I mean, stuff I was very unqualified to do. I actually at the time wore glasses just to look older. Now I'm 46 and wear glasses because I can't see. But I did really big stuff, but then I only led a team of, I think at most I had maybe 5 people reporting to me. So as I thought about the next role, I thought I need to prove out that I can lead a bigger team, that I'm, like a true leader, management, I'm management worthy. And so, as I looked at that next role, I was looking for something with a bigger team that was really, really important. And then I also realized that, this itch would come. And the itch always came, just when I was hitting my groove. I was the go-to person. Like, I could read an email in a hot second and I knew the answer. Things were easy, right? Like, I'd solved a lot of the problems when I came in, so they were running smoothly. And it was like this duality, right? I'd have this one person on one shoulder, maybe call it the angel that was like, oh, you've earned this. This is so, just enjoy it, Erin. Just glide. And then the little devil would be like, you suck, Erin. Yeah. You are so, like, you're not fired up. You're not the same person. You're not, you're not firing on all cylinders. You're bored. It's time for something new. And so I started to, it took me a few turns to, like, not get really pissed off at those two voices. And, after I started to realize a pattern, I'm like, oh, this is what I go through. And they fight and they duke it out and the devil always wins. So, the whole CEO position, I like to talk about it too for lessons for your listeners, because that was actually the next move. I after I went and took about a 40-person team that I led. The next move, I went to a wholly owned subsidiary, an acquisition that the parent company had bought called Payflex, and I actually went back to managing nobody for a short time anyway. And so it's one of those. Right?
Well, how is that?
People, right? Like, well, what are people going to think? They're going to look in the address book and think I took a demotion, right? All of a sudden, I don't have a team. And but I knew a couple things. One, there was some personal. Mick was really young. My youngest was 1, and my daughter was 3, and I'd been traveling all over the country. So a little bit was like, I need breathing room. But it was also strategic. And what I talk about a lot is, finding your next career is like finding a house. It's all about location. And, when we first start looking for houses, we're so tempted by the, like, quote unquote, move-in ready with the nice fancy kitchen. But those are typically also a 40-minute commute from your job, and they're in a bad neighborhood or on a busy road. When really what we should find, right? We should find that house that's in a great neighborhood, great location, that we can remodel, that maybe the kitchen's going to suck for a couple years. Yeah. And it's the same thing with careers. I look at it as like, find the right place where you can grow, where the macro industry is growing, where the organization promotes from within. Like, find a place where you can remodel your own kitchen or remodel your career. And that's really how I felt going to Payflex. I knew that industry was skyrocketing. I knew that the team that had come in under the acquisition, they were not going to want to work for a Fortune 50 company for long, right? They were entrepreneurs. There was going to be like leadership turnover, which created opportunity. So I went there in 2012, and what I say is, basically every time somebody left, they were like, why don't we give it to Erin? And I was like, okay. And and it just kept growing. I became the COO, which actually was a position I said no thank you to at first. That's a kind of a story in and of itself. But went back and said, okay, I'm going to do it. And the reason I said no thank you was I just had this fear that I was going to start to step into this place where I'd have to fit into this mold or this sort of club where I'd have to, like, I talked about it in my TED Talk, where my ego would grow and my calendar would overflow and my home life would become a shit show and my personality might even start to blow. And I didn't want that. But then, so what hit me, and over the weekend I was thinking about that position, was, wait a minute, you shouldn't not do something because you hate the way it was done before. You can do it your own way. And that's something that, I continue to preach and teach. But I went on, I decided, okay, I'm going to take on the COO role, but I'm not going to compromise, sacrifice, be a schmuck, a schmoozer, all those things. And then a year later, the CEO of the company was pulled onto another big assignment at the parent company. And they tapped me as interim CEO, right? So it was like, it's yours, but we're going to go shopping.
Yeah,
we're going to
of
see
course.
who else is out there.
Yeah.
And at
you better be
first,
good.
It really pissed me off, right? I was like, how dare they, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, you know what? I'm going to figure out if I want it too. And what was great about that was, you know, if I would have had to go through the normal process, which normal is like my kryptonite, if I would have gone based on resume, based on a bunch of interviews with executives against some other, quite frankly, probably dude with, 20 years of experience I didn't have, I wouldn't have gotten the job. But instead, I said, okay, while you're out shopping, I'm going to kick so much ass that there's going to be no question, zero question, whose job this is. And that's what I did. That's what I did. 3 months later, it was, it was handed to me, and I got to take over the mess of the company I inherited.
There's so much in the stories that you just shared that I'm going to step back a little bit and try and unpack and dig a little bit deeper into some things. One of the interesting themes that I am observing, listening to your stories, is best captured by your analogy or your metaphor of the angel and the devil battling. For so many people who may be listening to or watching this, when they experience that internal battle, their instinct, and it's habituated over time, is to let the quote-unquote angel win and to slide into comfort, to take a second and really breathe in and enjoy that comfort. And it might be comfortable for a day. And then they might say, I'll be comfortable for a week, a year, 10 years have passed. Part of the reason I felt it was an imperative for me to leave with the city, there were a whole host of reasons, but the secret fear I had was that I could become comfortable and be that gray-haired older man wearing the same doggone blue suit every day for 60 years, then retiring and being forgotten. Something in me made me decide to listen to my quote-unquote devil. What made you decide to listen to your devil, especially when so many people, particularly in the fields that you have historical expertise in and a lot of, professional background in, simply pay attention to that angel and slide into their comfort zones permanently?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd like to say is there's two different Erins. There's inspired Erin and uninspired Erin. And they're two totally different people. And I don't like uninspired Erin. I think what it came down to is I knew I didn't like the person I was when I was born. Even though it might feel comfortable, I have always wanted to feel like I was a little, I was above average, that I was a go-getter, that I made stuff happen. And when I started to get bored and complacent, that fire was gone. And I first diagnosed it early on as me maybe getting lazy. Maybe I sprinted this whole work thing too quickly, and I don't have what it takes to run the marathon. But then I realized it's not that I'm lazy. It's not that I don't have what it takes. And so many of my clients, this is the case for them. They've just hit a moment where they're not inspired. They're bored. They don't have the challenge. And even though the challenge on paper sounds like something they shouldn't want, the challenge is the very thing that makes them them.
Right. When you talked a few minutes ago about taking some of these higher level jobs and creating them or moving forward with them on your own terms, how did you deal with the fear that you must have felt around the risk associated with taking that sort of approach to what was at each step the highlight of your career?
Yeah, for me, it's really it's about the addictions that I created. I tell people all the time, I don't change people, I change their addictions. And it was really about the curiosity and the experiments. So just to give you a tangible example, and obviously doing it my own way is the authenticity that I now preach and teach. I would have moments, for example, I tell a story about going into this massive contract negotiation that really truly could have made or broken our company. And, on paper, like the typical, very nice, but, white-haired gentleman or graying gentleman that had been in the industry forever, probably negotiated, 10x the number of deals I had. And I remember just thinking, well, I'm just going to experiment. Like that one, I actually talk about authenticity. I literally said, what's important to you in this negotiation? I remember asking him right up front, and it was like this little experiment, and he puked out like valuable nuggets. I mean, not bad, but he basically told me, exactly what was most important to him, that he had long-term contracts. So I knew what my negotiating lever was with him. If I could get this deal to be signed, and I could do a 3-year versus a 1-year, I could give him a 5-year versus a 1-year. And then, and it was a little experiment. Yeah. And then, I'm just always experimenting. And then when he asked me the same question, I told him straight up. I said, well, first of all, our financials are struggling, so we can't have a deal where we have a price increase. Like we can't handle it right now where the company's at. And then secondly, I'm interim CEO right now. I got to be honest. If I negotiate a good deal here, that's going to help me become the CEO, right? So, just things like that, or, just little experiments where, I would go into a quarterly business review where most people were, given the facts and the figures and the red, yellow, greens. And I was like, I'm going to do the thing that I would want on the other end. I mean, that's one of the most powerful things about authenticity. It's simply going, instead of thinking about what's the norm, think about, what am I sick of, and what would I want? So, I would, for example, I would tell a story. I would have some sort of analogy or story. It would just be a little experiment. And I was always watching and observing. And for example, at that time, getting my boss to smile, she was very hard-nosed. Like, I was like, okay, I got her to smile. That's good. Victory! It was a number of experiments that ultimately, like, can I get the success and results? Because that's what's in it for me, right? It wasn't, can I do things differently purely because I want to have a better home life and balance? And that's the output. But if you can figure out how to do this, and I really used authenticity as my secret weapon, get the results, and then have the other positive benefit, which is, you're not relocating your family, you're not traveling all the time, you're not, becoming some person that you're embarrassed is, the person you're becoming. So it was really about a bunch of experiments. And when I talk a lot about this, not just for me, but for example, that boss was not very authentic. But when she started doing Erin acts like this, which is a little different. And then she, Erin comes in 2 months later and her results are getting better. Like, it's, a little Pavlov's dog. Okay, maybe
right. She put two and two together.
Give me a side eye. Because she just wants results.
Right.
And I was getting that.
Let me ask you, when you were CEO at that point in your life, was the creation of a culture that supported authenticity within the company even a mote in your mind's eye, or was that something that you developed later? Were you living and encouraging that authentic, sensibility within your staff, or were you a female Darth Vader, or were you something?
So I was living and breathing it. I just had to not put a name on it. So culture was extremely important to me. In fact, I, literally invested over $300,000 just in, I declared a couple years into my CEO that culture would be our number one strategy, not in the fluffy, like quoting the like culture eats, strategy for breakfast bullshit. I was like, no, this is our secret weapon, our strategy. I lived it and breathed it. I didn't call it that. So the epiphany really came, I knew people related to me. I knew I was genuine. I knew I bucked the norm. I knew I was doing something. But it's so funny, that word authenticity, which of course I had heard it before, but it really I didn't get the badge until I announced my retirement. So when I decided to leave the corporate world and announce I was technically retiring because I'd been at the parent company so long, of the hundreds and hundreds of phone calls and letters and emails, like 50% of them kept saying this word: we're going to miss your authentic leadership. And I literally, I remember having a moment, because I also have to say that I worked really hard in my career, But there were a lot of times where I felt guilty, that I had other executives around me that I felt like sacrificed a lot more. It would be oh, we had to cancel a vacation because something blew up, or relocating their family, right, for an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I didn't do that. I didn't do any of those things by and large. And in a way, I felt like, why is it kind of a little bit easier for me? And I feel a little guilty about it. So when those letters came through and they said, kept saying over and over this authentic leadership, I remember going, wait, is it really that easy? Is that what that was? Is that, like, I started to have this moment. It sounds so cheesy and so contrived, but literally like, wait, that I think was the thing that gave me success, but also allowed me to have that feeling of like, it's not quite as hard for me.
Amazing. I love the story about your retirement itself. Could you share that with us? Like, what happened? Tell us about the plane ride.
Yeah, well, the angel and devil showed up, as they always do. About 3 years. So the company was struggling pretty big time. It had a rough integration post acquisition, and I turned around. We tripled earnings in 3 years. Employee engagement scores went up 12 percentage points. This is 900 people.
Beautiful.
In just a couple years, and so the angel was happy,
Love
right?
it.
The angel was like, okay, your CISO's not calling you on Friday nights with some like break into the system. Your customers aren't screaming and yelling. Like, enjoy it. You finally, like, you've done it. But the devil showed up. And when the devil showed up this time, I started to think about what's next. And of course, the first thing I thought too was like within the company, because that's what I had been doing for 20 some years, taking new opportunities all within this same enterprise. And it's like, if you go to the restaurant and, whenever you pick up a menu and try to figure out what to order, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I kind of like taste things in my head, right? Like I read through and I'm like, burger, no, not feeling like a burger. And then, taco, not feeling. And I was doing that with next opportunities, and quite literally. So one of my big sponsors, Karen Lynch is her name. She is the new CEO of CVS Corp. So CVS, as we all know, it's on your corner, right?
Wonderful.
It's also a Fortune 5 company. Like, I don't know if you know, because they bought Aetna, our parent company. So I was sitting in her office, beautiful, big, office bigger than my downstairs in my house, and she knew I was itching, and she was throwing all these opportunities, like, well, what if you did this, or what if you led that? And it was like I was trying on the menu, but nothing tastes good. But it's so awkward, right? Because you didn't want to be that person that's like, no. So I remember thinking, like, I have to position this differently. I remember saying no, and then the next one I'd be like, well, what I like about that is this, but what I don't quite like about it is this. And so that itch had started, and in my head, I had thought, you know what, I think it needs to be scratched, like, totally differently. I think I need to go out and I don't know what it is. I didn't know it was Be Authentic. But I hadn't talked to a lot of people. So yeah, I was traveling, and I was actually on Southwest. So I met this woman actually in the line, and we struck up a conversation and decided to carry on and talk on the flight. And, she was former corporate for like 10 years, but had been running her own business for like 20 years. And, I was asking her all these questions. She was actually in kind of healthcare, HR. So I was asking her all these questions, and she just seemed so happy. And then, when you have weird thoughts and you've never really voiced them, what better place to do it than to some stranger on a plane, right? So I finally say to her, I'm asking you all these questions because I'm starting to think about what's next for me. And then as soon as it came out of my mouth, all I thought was, well, that sounds really freaking stupid, and then I said to her, I said, but that would be really stupid right now because my reputation's at an all-time high. Like, they're throwing all these things at me, right? Like, I'm only 44. Maybe I was 43 at the time, whatever it was. And she just looked at me, and she was so succinct and so deadpan. And she just goes, who says this is the top? And that one moment, the metaphor came, screaming into my head. I saw the mountains. I immediately had all this fear of, like, I've never hiked this one. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what the view is from the side, the top. And that one statement, as cliche as it sounds, was kind of the turning point internally to say, okay, this itch has to be scratched on a different mountain.
How did you come to focus on authenticity as the locus of your message?
So it's so funny, right? Like, you would think, based on what I told you, that I would leave and go preach authenticity. Well, no, of course it wasn't that simple. I had these different buckets of things I was considering. Go run another smaller healthcare startup, be a CEO of, kind of learn the venture capital, private equity world, start a software company, could be a consultant. And then career and leadership was like this bucket that I knew on paper would be good because I'm good at that. Like people, that was one of my strengths. But it seemed so dime a dozen. Right? There's a bazillion executive coaches, and I hate normal, right? I hate being a dime. And so I kind of shoved that one to the side, and instead, I said, oh, it's this I'm going to start this software company. I had this idea, and it was solving a problem I had as a working mother, and started down the road, and I did all the stuff that Erin loves to do, like, get the branding, the strategy deck. And then I was like, and then I remember meeting with this guy in New York City, and he's like, well, you have to, next step really is start building a prototype. And I was like, I don't like to build. Like, I like to create. Yeah. Create and building right. Tangible things is different than
that's not fun.
Creating. And at the same time, I had said, I'm going to blog though, because I know a lot of people are going to, like their jaws dropped when they found out I was retiring at 44 and, my career was good. I'm going to blog. And it's so funny. My son plays hockey, and I remember sitting up at the hockey rink, cold as hell in those stupid bleachers, butt just frozen. But I bring my computer in, and I just started writing, blog ideas. I'd start writing drafts. I was a math major, not a writer, right? And a month later, I had 37 pages, single-spaced, of blog posts written. And I thought, okay,
wow.
I didn't think I was a writer, but I guess when you have a lot of shit to say, now I'm like, writing is just talking on paper. And I had to go through that same epiphany I had when I said no to the COO position. I thought, wait, career and leadership, you should not do something because you hate the way it was done before. You can do it your own way, right? Like, obviously the working world's still pretty screwed up. So it's not like they've solved all the problems. Something's not, clicking for at least some people, some organizations. And so I thought, what if I do it? And I think this authenticity thing that had been sort of still swimming and, in my mind as, wait, was that the thing that made me successful and made it easier? I thought, you know what? I'm going to go that path instead, and I'm going to do it my own freaking way.
I want to talk a little bit about authenticity. And maybe we could begin to dive into it with just a couple of questions that I have about it. And one of which is one that I think that you in particular might speak to, because I suspect, and I could be totally wrong here, that there can be some real double standards that come into play with regards to authenticity. Now, you may not have noticed this. People who have seen or heard me or listened to or watched this podcast may have never noticed this. But I'm big, I'm loud, I'm brash, I'm in your face. That's my authentic self. And I don't back down from it. And people can accept that from a man. But sometimes I suspect, and I've even observed, that the room for genuine authenticity that women have can, or at least appears to me sometimes, to be a little bit constrained. Or at least there may be issues, right? If you're like a big, brash, loud woman walking into a large organizational office, some large organizations will accept that. Others, the cultures, will shut it down in a way that they might not someone like me. Am I just imagining things here? Or is there a grain of truth in what I'm saying? And if so, talk to me and our listeners about how someone can navigate that, who might be part of, whose ability to feel like they could truly be themselves is constrained by some of these invidious characteristics, their gender, maybe their race, other things that they can't just walk away from.
So, I think the first thing is there's something so beautiful in this concept of authenticity, meaning just be yourself. But it's not the definition I subscribe to. Now, at a pool party, yeah, just be yourself, right? When I think about, when I thought about this word, now help me, and I kept getting this badge from other people, I knew that I hadn't just been myself. There was something more to it. And so as I started to think about it, I'm like, well, it's so powerful, but like, how do I teach it? Because if the definitions be yourself, it's like inherently personal. So there's no way, like, how do I put a formula to it? But I also knew that it was, I had this gut feeling. It was more, really the people that we see and go, right? The Michelle Obamas of the world and the Jacinda Ardens and the people that we just exhale, or when they have a moment where you're like, that was so authentic. Like, it's usually an aha moment.
Yeah.
And so I started looking into it, and actually the Greek origin of the word authenticity means to be genuine, original, and or authoritative. So authenticity actually, first of all, is not simply being yourself. It's like this more beautiful, like I say in my TED Talk, it's sort of like being yourself and being badass. It's sort of like if Joe Exotic had a baby with Kamala Harris, right? Like, it's like this juxtaposition of, loosey-goosey, but also kind of badass. And so from there, I thought, okay, I've proved that it isn't just be yourself. So what is it? And actually, that's what I've been doing over the last year, and what I write about in the book is, and I talk about authenticity as strategic authenticity, which I'm sure some people would be like, that's BS. Like, that's, you're that's an oxymoron, that's a cop-out, but it isn't. So at the end of the day, the main power of authenticity, it's really about connecting with other people. It's about gaining their attention, their trust, their relationship, and inspiring and motivating them. So when you ask your question, what I would say to you is, there's actually a richer definition of the word. And I have something called the 6 Principles of Strategic Authenticity. And there's an acronym behind it called HUMANS. And HUMANS stands for humility, unexpected, model, adapt. We'll come back to that one for sure. Adapt, narrate, or storytelling, right? And spark. And what I've done with each of those is really tied those to the qualities of so many people, including myself, that have authenticity, and actually put a formula to how you can use those components of what I think authenticity is made up of to connect better with people. Now, adapt. I want to go there first. I mean, that's, again, talk about an oxymoron. Wait, adapt. But here's the thing. And I talk about adaptation both externally, but also for yourself. So the first is, you really have to, true authenticity, you have to plug into others. Because if you ran around just being Scott, and I ran around being Erin, and my husband ran around being himself, David, there'd be this force field of limited connection. The analogy, if you flew over to France tomorrow and you woke up and wanted to, trim that beard so it looked perfect, and you pulled out your beard trimmer, you couldn't do that immediately. You need an adapter, right? Like, things are a little different in France. They have different plugs, right? And it's the same with people. That true authenticity isn't just selfish, that you're always thinking, like, what does the other person want, desire? What can they connect into? How can I adapt so that my authenticity comes and it plugs in like that plug does in France? And then also I talk about adaptation. The second part of that is, I'm a firm believer, like, knowing who yourself, again, I'm sure there'll be critics galore, like, it's so important to understand who you are first. I can't disagree with that. But if I had to pick, if you said, I got 4 hours to either A, figure out who I am, or B, figure out who I want to be, I would say spend 4 hours figuring out who you want to be, or maybe 3 hours and 15 minutes. Because we're always, like, our personalities aren't permanent, right? I talk about Benjamin Hart's book, and talks about personality. It's more important to figure out who that future self. So the adapt part of HUMANS is also really important for yourself to constantly you're not the same Scott you were 10 years ago, right? I think that's probably years ago, but
Yeah,
I'm
thank
guessing
goodness.
that's a safe bet.
Yes. I'm so relieved that I'm not. The Scott now is a zillion times better. Please, forget that other person exists. I don't know who he was. He's in that corner, not anywhere near me. You know, Erin, one of the things that you've talked about, particularly with regards to adaptability in the past few minutes, ties again back to something that you said earlier. You're tying the concept of authenticity and its sub-point, adaptability, to thinking about connection to what other people might need, or the cultural milieu that you're in, or what their feeling states are, or a whole other person related sorts of mindset focuses. And earlier, when you talked about, you know, delivering these business presentations, you also talked about, well, you know, I was bored to death watching these endless spreadsheets just put up on a screen. What would I want if I were the one, you know, if I were not the one delivering this? How can I cater to those? Am I correct in hearing a connection between the concept of empathy and authenticity? And if so, to me, that's unusual, because as often as not in the self-improvement state or space, if I were to be totally honest with you, I hear a conflation of authenticity with selfishness, which is actually kind of what you're preaching against, if I'm hearing you correctly. Or am I just totally
I think it's somewhere in between.
crazy?
I don't know if empathy is the word I would use. I mean, certainly everybody's definition will slightly evolve, but I would say awareness. More than anything, what are people craving? What are they sick of? What can I do? That's why one of my favorite of the letters is you, which sounds so lame, unexpected. Like this concept of always being unexpected. If you think about it, in the business world, as we're developing our business, our products, innovation, right? Cars, toothpaste, whatever. We're so like, yes, innovation, and like we're going to come out with something that our competitors don't have, right? There's such a focus on bucking the norm and being unexpected in some ways. But then the way we act as we're trying to innovate as people, as we get on meetings and as we do presentations and, whatever it is in the write emails, we're so expected. We're following the same formula. And to me, like, we need to innovate just as much as humans in how we act and how we interact with people as we do with our products. And quite frankly, if we start to do that, I'm pretty sure the innovation of our products, of our business, right? It's a primer, right? So the more that we can, back to your point, empathy or just awareness of like what is going to wake people up, what's going to connect with them, what's going to, one of the short definitions I give is authenticity really is just about exposing who you are when people least expect it. And then the power that comes from that and the results that come from that are just endless.
But what if I'm someone who is secretly afraid that my authentic self is something or someone everyone's going to hate?
Then you sound prime for experiments, just like every other human. It's really about, I would never want you to, I talk about it all the time in my book. Don't wake up the day after you read my book and change who you are. Just start experiments. I do a lot of exercise in there where I'm like, you know what? Next week, Scott, just go to one meeting where you normally are going to go through bullets on a page or, data and facts in a bullet on a PowerPoint. Just one meeting and say, how could I instead tell a story? Metaphorical story or, even if it's not a fancy story, maybe you tell the story about how you collected the data and the moment where you really realized as you were doing the research what came out instead of just talking about the end result. So, I don't change people. I think, if you're like, I don't know, and this is certainly, especially for people of color and obviously people like you that come from all kinds of diverse backgrounds that don't feel normal. I think getting through that, and sometimes, I don't think you've made it probably there yet, but like part 2, I talk about, the sucky songs you sing. And what I say is, before we move on, the first part's about the power of authenticity. The third part's about how do you actually put this humans into work. But before we do that, we have to actually prime you. It's like if let's say you had an old bench that you and David wanted to like paint up and make new. You don't pull it out and throw paint on it, right? You sand it, you prime it. Otherwise, you're going to have bubbles. And so it's the same thing with you. And so, I talk about like, now that I've got you ready and excited to implement authenticity, now that you're like pumping your fist in the air, I'm going to piss you off. And why? Because you're going to go out, you're going to be excited about authenticity, and then you're going to run into an asshole, right? But here's the thing. There's a lot of assholes running around in the working world. But the first asshole you're probably going to run into is you. Right? And it's you saying, oh, I don't think that. It's you coming into a discussion with me and be like, I got to time this down. She was a CEO. I can't be full Scott. How do you know that? You couldn't be any more wrong. So, it's really about, first getting into that mental state of being okay with being different. And then it's about experimentations. And sometimes those experiments are super tiny. I mean, I talk about like the time I changed my out of office. I mean, how small is that? Instead of talking like a robot, having the same damn out of office I had for 20 years, I talk like a human. That was really low risk, right? Like, what are people going to think? Are they going to think I'm weird? Are they going to like it, right?
Totally.
So, experiment, experiment, experiment.
I think I'm going to have to go right into my out of office form template thingy right after this taping is over and change it right away. Yeah, make that fun. You know what? You mentioned sucky songs a few minutes ago. Let's pivot a little bit. You know, Erin, everything in my world ultimately goes back to disco. I can't help it. What is your personal disco anthem and why?
This is me from The Greatest Showman, especially have you ever seen, for you and your listeners, do you please tell me you've seen the Greatest Showman.
I'm going to have to slink under the desk now.
My gosh. Tonight, you are watching The Greatest Showman. Oh my gosh. Amazing movie. This Is Me is the song that the bearded lady belts out. Do you know that it was on the radio? And there is, I'm going to send you a YouTube link. There is a Queer Eye, the Queer Eye guys did a version of it, and they had these different kids. I would be really surprised if we don't cry. But that song, that song, This Is Me has definitely been my anthem the last couple of years.
I love it. Well, there are a lot more, things that we could be talking about today. We could be talking all afternoon. But I want anyone watching or listening to be able to find out more about you for themselves. So where can they find you? Tell us a little bit more about your book and anything else you think we should know as we close out.
Yeah, so the best way to find all the things is at beauthenticinc.com. And it's just the letter B, no E, so beauthenticinc.com. I got a lot of stuff going on. So I had a TEDx that released a couple of weeks ago. You can find that on the website, or you can YouTube Erin Hatzikostas. You Google search it. Why you don't have to compromise for your career. My book is called You Do You-ish. Unleash Your Authentic Superpowers to Get the Career You Deserve. That releases on February 15th. But if you go on my website, you can see all about it. You could pre-order it, or you could wait till it's out. And then on socials, if you want to hang out a little more 3D-ish, I'm most active on LinkedIn at Erin Hatzikostas. I'm the only Erin Hatzikostas. So if you can spell my last name, Erin Hatzikostas, you can find me. I am the only one in the world. So if you just Google me, you find all kinds of crud. And then Instagram at Erin Hatzikostas, where I poke fun at work, I give you suggestions, and I keep everything totally authentic.
And I've got to say, I've spent some time looking at the pre-release version of your book. It is hilarious. It is worth reading just for a laugh, but there's a lot of serious content in there as well. And I learned even, just sort of going through it in preparation for this interview. And I also have to say one thing to any and every single person who is tuning in. go to that LinkedIn profile of yours, because it is the only LinkedIn profile I have ever experienced where I have been laughing while I was reading the profile.
Yeah, all of my...
There have been comedians, professional comedians, where their profile is, somber as a funeral. Yours, it's delicious. That's just the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, and it's another example of authenticity. So, like, all of my summaries, for example, of my position summaries, are stories instead of business buzzword bingo.
Yes.
So, yeah, check it out. Hopefully you'll be inspired to stay. And if you watch my TED Talk, I coached you through sort of 3 authenticity starters, and that's when I hammer home quite loudly.
Amazing. Amazing. Erin, it has been great taking a ride with you today. Thank you so much for being on the show. And for everyone listening or watching, we will see you next time for another trip down Scott Mason's Purpose Highway. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Join our community today at purposehighway.com and subscribe to get notified when new episodes go live. Scott Mason, checking out.